there's a place, a school, an institution where a professor resides. Listen to words of Professor Buitron.
Hey, this is Professor Buitron, and I have many questions over a video that was produced this past week by a Mr. Jesse Enkamp, which was a fascinating video. It's a video that just agrees what I've been preaching for the last 30 years. I'm glad that it occurred. But before we go into any details, hit the subscribe button. We have a lot of more materials coming up. And if you guys wish to ask any questions, email me at buitronacademy2012@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, on Partner, on Twitter. We got videos coming up left and right, not only about history, about techniques, about methods, about just the whole issue of the fighting science of Savate, Boxe Francaise, Savate, Boxe Francaise, and of course, Danse, Savate. Let's touch base with to reiterate what Mr. Enkamp said. The high kicks of Japanese karate come from Savate. Okay, I'm going to elaborate on that. They are French kicks. The problem is that everybody convolutes Boxe Francaise and Savate as one fighting system, and it's not true. There were two distinct fighting methods that lived alongside each other for way over, I would say, since 1830 to 1978. So you all can do the math. Okay? Savate Boxe Francaise now is a sport of the combination of those two fighting sciences together. And it's its own sport now. It's its own pedagogy. It's its own art. It's a combative sport that I trained in, I fought in. I train others to fight in, and we continue doing that. Now, what is Danse Savate? And I'll answer you that question. Danse Savate is a combination of all the other French disciplines into one teaching pedagogy. Our sports are la canne de combat and Boxe Francaise Savate, okay? And that's what people confuse. But let's touch base on the melding of what Savate, or the French martial arts, Savate has done to the world. In a book by General Jappy, okay, some of his documents that we researched, we're talking back in 1840, 1850, Boxe Francaise Savate was being used in the military. It was a military art. And what happened was that as the military art, and as it was going through, it started being spread out throughout the world. So by 1850, Boxe Francaise Savate had already gone around the world. They were training it at West Point and the Mexican Military Academy. They had it. In Rio, they were teaching it alongside fencing. Okay, so a lot of people, it was taught alongside fencing for officers, part of the officers' regiment. Savate, on the other thing, was a art that was still taught in the streets of Paris. They still had schools there in Paris. It's a total different entity. The kicking, the movement, everything was different. And if you all don't believe me, watch a fight on YouTube for two professors, two great friends of mine. Dominic Daclouis, which was my older brother in Savate under Robert Paturel, who was a great champion, a great professor. Papillon himself, you can see his style and how he's moving. That's Savate. And when he fought against Andre Panza, another excellent individual, Boxe Francaise. So you have a Saboteur against a Boxe Francaise. This happened. This was in the 80s. Okay, well, anyway, different stories. We can talk about those fights later. Now, what I'm looking at with the Japanese connection, is put that, it comes in several parts, several segments. During the Meiji era, the Japanese wanted to become a world power. They learned everything with the U.S. at first. You guys can see that under The Last Samurai. stuff like that was what occurred. The Bushido blade, all that stuff that occurred under Polk and under all those generals back then during the 1800s, 1880s, when Japan wanted to be part of it. They wanted us to be absorbed into the United States. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. So when the United States were taken away, thrown out, the French went in. Okay? The first Europeans were Portuguese, US, then the French came in. It's a military base. Okay? And they started teaching them military tactics, military weapons. The bayonet was passed on. The way you fought, the way you lined up, the way the brigade system was, all that was French to Japan. Okay? So did the fight. I have a picture up here in the wall, which I'll show it to you in a bit. A corporal by the name of Legrand, student of Albert, okay, and Joseph Charlemont, these are professors in the 1800s, maths in the 1800s, was a military officer who was sent around the world to teach others Boxe Francaise. Imagine that, teaching others how to fight in Boxe Francaise back in the 1900s. Okay, but Legrand was 1900, circa 1903, 1910. Okay, so he produced a lot of great Japanese officers. And what did they do? They will take the officers, they will teach them Boxe Francaise, and they in turn will teach the rest of the Japanese army. Okay, those were the commissions that occurred back then. And of course, some of the kicks were where you can see the differences. Well, in one of these pictures, they claim that Funakoshi is inside it. And I always had it. The first time I heard this, I was having a conversation with Count Peruzzi, who revived Boxe Francaise and Savate after World War II, and Maître Sylvain Salvani, who was my Lutte Parisienne instructor, as well as Paturel and as well as Viviani. But he was Jean-Paul Viviani and Pierre Shine. But he was the one that used to kind of teach us what Lutte Parisienne was. We had to go through him to get the okay. You know, you're okay now, and Lutte Parisienne, go on and teach. Interesting times. People do not understand all the traditions that existed during Savate, apart from the Federation at the time that was taking everything through. So it's a nice bit, but we'll talk about it through other conversations. But this is very interesting. So that was the first time Boxe Francaise had entered Japanese. Okay. Most of the karates came out of Okinawa, went to Japan. Funakoshi made it in the 1920s. Judos came of age. During World War II, okay, there were two distinct freedom fighting forces. One force came from Savate schools, where my professor, Maître Roger Lafont, came out of. In fact, he was a prisoner of war. I'll show the picture where he was at in Stalingrad. A neat story where he was told by the Nazis, and he was crying here in Laredo, Texas, telling us that the Nazis told him that if he did not teach him Savate, they would mistreat or even kill French prisoners. So with tears coming out of his eyes, he said, Paul, sometimes in Savate, you have to do bad things to do good. Learned that while being a professor. That's always been in my mind, you know? Anyway, when World War II was going on, you had two distinct schools, of course, Boxe Francaise and Savate, and both were kept separate even within the French resistance. Okay, the Ceronese was big, deep. Savate was a hub of the French resistance. After the war, Savate was dying. They didn't have that many players left. The Boxe Francaise a little bit more. Camporusi kind of developed. Two separate federations continued. Okay, you had a National Federation of Boxe Francaise and Savate, you had French Fédération de Savate. Okay, two different ones. The names vary. But anyway, how did Savate stay alive? Here's what happened. The judo players that loved judo so much and loved the tradition of judo searched the Savate instructors like Lafont. Okay? And Sergis was his student. And they started learning Savate. So for time's sake, of span of the 50s, 60s, even 70s, if you became a professor of judo, you also became a professor of Savate. The late Christian Guillaume, which was my brother underneath Matthew Roger Lafont, even though he was much older. I'll show a picture of him. He has an excellent story, which we'll talk about later, but I'll show a picture anyway. And he was challenged by Japanese kickboxers, champions, and Thai boxers. And he went over there and he crushed them in the ring. Imagine that, 1968, he was popping around people inside Japan. Savate is a kickboxer. So when this goes on, the melding of Savate and judo, the cross training, produced the belts from the colored gloves of Savate, were transferred over to a rank system in judo. So judo was the first Oriental style that had colored belts. Another trivia for you guys to search for out there looking, because it is the truth. And so on and so forth. So it went to judo, judo went to karate, and so on and so forth. Now you have everybody doing it, which is fine because you need a structure within a school. Before you either had just a professor and you had students, and you had ranks. The French always had the ranks. And as you started growing, the first thing that happened was, guess what? You became a student, élève, disciple, silver glove, or prof. Anyway, I'm glad people are making that connection. I'm glad people are researching. Nothing to take away from the Japanese. They have excellent systems of fighting, great fighting styles, great fighting systems. But Savate has given more to the world of fighting than what people can imagine. And Savate never gets a thank you. So to me, this video was A-OK, A number one. Thank you guys. Peace. We'll see you. Like I said, subscribe. We got a bunch more stuff coming in. I'm going to be talking about specialty kicks, specialty punches, how to train them, how you can use them. I'm not producing people in the ring. Okay. I've shied away from that. We have a lot of people that don't understand and recognize time. I'm a very hard instructor, but we got a bunch of youth that are coming up that they need to learn everything about it anyway. I teach it regardless. Okay, people say, no, Professor Buitron doesn't teach, he only teaches for the street. I teach you for you to learn how to fight. People forget that Savate, Boxe Francaise. You need to learn any of the other disciplines. Okay, until next time. Peace.
Come train at the best kept secret of Laredo, Buitron Academy, 956-401-4868, savate.biz.